Picture a palace. The greatest palace ever built by human hands. Gold on every surface. Mirrors that multiply the candlelight until the room looks like the inside of a sun. Gardens so perfectly arranged that a single misplaced flower was a disciplinary matter. Fountains fed by aqueducts that took 20 years and 20,000 workers to build. Now imagine the smell, not the smell of the flowers, not the perfume, not the beeswax candles burning in their thousands, the other smell, the one underneath, the one that the perfume was covering, the one that seeped up through the marble floors and drifted down the gilded corridors and lingered in the folds of silk gowns that cost more than a French peasant would earn in 10 lifetimes. The smell of 17,000 people who did not bathe, not couldn't bathe, wouldn't bathe, refused to bathe, were in some cases actively proud of not bathing, who believed with complete sincerity and the full backing of the best medical minds of their age that water, plain, ordinary water, would kill them. That's Versailles. The most beautiful building in the world, where the corridors smelled like an open sewer, where the king himself hadn't submerged his body in water since roughly the age of 7, and where the solution to all of this was to spray everyone with something that smelled like a cat had died inside a flower. We're going back there tonight. Not as tourists staring at the Hall of Mirrors and taking photographs. We're going in through the servants' entrance. We're carrying something. We're working. One day, one person. Everything they would have seen, smelled, touched, and survived. So I make these history stories, and I genuinely don't know if you use them to fall asleep or if you're just one of those people who processes the horrors of the past as a form of relaxation. Either way, I'm not judging. Get comfortable. Here we go. Your eyes open in the dark. For a half second, just a half second, you don't remember where you are. Then it hits you. The smell. It's not just one smell. It never is. Not here. First, tallow. The cold, waxy residue of last night's candle, hardened now on the wooden table beside your pallet, still faintly warm in some deep interior that the night hasn't quite reached. Second, river. The Seine is 2 streets away, and in the summer of 1682 it smells like every crime the city of Paris has ever committed. Rotting vegetables, dye-house runoff, horseblood from the slaughterhouses upstream, the general output of 400,000 human bodies doing what human bodies do. Third, leather from the pair of boots hanging on the nail above your head. They belong to your master, Maître Arnaud, and he takes extraordinary care of them, rubbing them every other evening with a tallow grease that keeps the leather supple, but does nothing for the smell of the room. Fourth, a sweetness that doesn't belong here. Faint, almost imagined. Something floral and sharp and foreign in this garret above the Rue Saint-Honoré. It clings to your hands. It clings to your hair. It follows you everywhere now, like a rumour. It's the work. It's what you've spent the last 8 months learning. And underneath all of it, underneath every smell this city produces in its relentless, grinding, magnificent, nauseating daily life, you, yourself, the accumulated fact of a body that has been awake and working since before dawn and will be awake and working again in a few minutes. Welcome to Paris in the 39th year of the reign of Louis XIV, King of France and Navarre, God's anointed representative on the soil of the most powerful kingdom in Europe. It smells like this. You're lying on a straw pallet on a wooden floor in a garret room. One room, really just an attic alcove, above the workshop of Maître Georges Arnaud, gantier parfumeur, licensed member of the guild, holder of a royal patent that allows him to sell scented gloves to anyone with enough money to buy them. Your name is Jean-Baptiste Morel. You are 17 years old. You arrived in Paris 9 months ago from Grasse, which is a small town in Provence that produces more lavender and rose and jasmine than anywhere else on earth, and whose young men frequently end up in the perfume trade whether they want to or not, because what else is there? Back in Grasse, everyone said Paris would either make you or eat you alive. They said it cheerfully, like it was a good thing either way. The room is dark, which means it's before 5 in the morning. The light in this garret comes from a single window, small and set at an angle that catches perhaps 2 hours of direct sun on a good day. You know the time by the church bells. Saint-Roch, closest, and behind it the deeper voice of Saint-Eustache, and behind that the whole scattered orchestra of a city that has more churches than it has clean water. They haven't rung yet. You're awake before them. Which means Maître Arnaud is also awake, because he is always, always awake before you. You have never in 9 months beaten him to the workshop. You've tried. You've lain awake on this pallet, willing yourself not to fall asleep, just so that you could be the one standing at the workbench when he came downstairs. It hasn't worked. You sit up. The wooden floor is cold under your bare feet, in a way that goes straight through the soles and up your shins and settles in your knees. Summer is over. September has arrived. The city is already transitioning into the particular grey dampness that it will maintain, without significant variation, until April. You pull on your clothes by feel in the dark. They're draped over the end of the pallet in the order you take them. Breeches, stockings, shirt, waistcoat. The shirt is clean. That's important. Clean linen is the foundation of everything. Maître Arnaud has told you this approximately 50 times in 9 months, but you understood it already, because in Grasse your mother told you first. A man with clean linen, she said, when she was folding yours into the bundle you'd carry to Paris, is a man who respects himself, no matter what else he can't afford. The shirt is clean because you washed it yourself 2 days ago, in cold water from the barrel in the courtyard, beating it against the stone ledge until your knuckles were raw. It dried stiff and slightly grey, the way linen always goes in Paris, regardless of how carefully you wash it, because the air in Paris is not clean, and the things suspended in the air of Paris attach themselves to fabrics with a kind of democratic persistence that makes no distinction between noble cloth and apprentice cloth. Still, it's washed. That matters. Downstairs, in the workshop, the morning has already begun without you. Maître Arnaud is standing at the central bench in the pale grey light that comes through the single, large window facing the street. He's a small man. You've gained an inch on him in the last 9 months and will probably gain another before spring, with a face that looks like it was made from a harder material than ordinary faces, all sharp angles and deep-set eyes that move constantly, cataloguing. His hands, when they work, are almost frightening in their precision. They don't waver, they don't tremble, they know exactly where they're going before the rest of him decides. Right now, they're measuring. The bench in front of him holds 3 glass flasks, a small balance scale, a notebook open to a page dense with figures, and a pottery bowl containing what looks like rendered fat but isn't, or isn't just. It's enfleurage pomade. You know this smell now the way you know the smell of your own skin. Cold fat, lard, or sometimes purified pork fat from a supplier in the Marais, that has been pressed against fresh jasmine petals for 72 hours, absorbing their scent. The petals get replaced, again and again. until the fat is saturated, until it holds a concentration of jasmine that take 100 petals per gram just to reach the starting point. This is what perfume is at its most basic. Fat remembering flowers. You're late, Maître Arnaud says without looking up. You're not late. It cannot be past 4:30. You know this because the bells of Saint-Roch haven't rung yet, and Saint-Roch rings every half hour, and the last bell you remember hearing in the dark was 2 o'clock. You say nothing. You take your place at the smaller bench to his left, the one that's yours since roughly the 3rd month of your apprenticeship, when he decided your hands could be trusted with the intermediate work. The Comtesse de Villars wants her order by Tuesday, he says. Yes, sir. Which means today we finish the extraction, and tomorrow we begin the blending, and the day after tomorrow you take it to her house on the Rue Saint-Thomas du Louvre, and you do not drop it, and you do not smell it yourself more than 3 times, because if you smell it too many times in a row, you stop being able to smell it at all, and you come back having collected the balance of her payment, which is 42 livres, which she will attempt to pay in 40. A pause. He lifts the flask slightly, holds it at a precise angle to the window. She will not succeed in paying 40. Yes, sir. You know how you're going to handle that? You've thought about this. I'll thank her for the 40 and explain that the Comtesse de Soissons paid 45 for a similar composition last month, and that word of generosity, or the opposite, tends to travel in certain circles. A pause. His hands keep moving. Good, he says. High praise from Maître Arnaud. You need to understand something about the perfume trade in Paris in 1682 before we go any further. Because this isn't just about selling things that smell nice. This is about survival, not metaphorical survival, actual physical you-will-die survival. The perfumers of Paris are not simply merchants of luxury. They are, in the estimation of their customers, the estimation of almost everyone in France except the peasants and a handful of sceptical physicians, a medical profession. Here's why. For roughly 300 years, the dominant theory of how disease spreads has been the miasma theory. The word comes from the Greek for pollution. The theory, simply stated, is this. Disease travels through bad air, specifically through the rotting, fetid air that rises from decomposing matter, from swamps, from sewers, from the bodies of the sick and the dead. Breathe the bad air, get the disease. This isn't completely wrong, by the way. Some diseases, malaria gets its name from the Italian for bad air, do concentrate in the same low, marshy places that produce the worst smells. The theory is wrong about the mechanism, but the observation underneath it has a certain statistical accuracy. The problem is where it leads. If bad smells cause disease, then good smells prevent it. That's the logic, and it's not fringe logic. It's mainstream, academically endorsed, guild-approved logic. The fumigation of sick rooms with burning herbs, the pomanders of cloves and nutmeg carried by physicians making their rounds, the bouquets of flowers held to the nose when passing through a particularly ripe stretch of street. All of these are understood by the people using them, not as perfumery or decoration or comfort, but as medicine. But now comes the part where the logic makes a terrible turn. If bad air enters the body through breathing, what else might it enter through? The skin. Open the pores, through heat, through steam, through the action of water on the surface of the body, and you open 1,000 tiny doors. 1,000 tiny doors through which the miasma can enter, through which the plague, the pox, the fever can crawl, one invisible particle at a time, into the blood. This was not a fringe view. This was taught. In the medical schools at Paris and Montpellier and Bologna, by men with degrees and positions in the ear of kings, don't bathe. The water will kill you. And if you happen to be poor and happen to have no choice but to wash, because you are a laundress, because you washed other people's clothes for a living, because you worked in a dye house or a tannery or any of the 100 trades that involved immersion in liquid, well, that was just one more indignity the poor had to suffer. Another way the city ground them down. But if you were rich, if you had a choice, you kept yourself clean with linen, you changed your shirt. That was bathing. That was the theory fully realized. A fresh linen shirt pressed against the body would absorb the sweat and the oils and the residue of the previous day. Pull it off. Put a new one on. You were, according to the medical wisdom of your age, clean. The smell said otherwise, but that's what perfume's for. You work for 3 hours before the city outside the workshop window fully wakes up. Your hands do what they've learned to do over 9 months of repetition. Measuring, blending, filtering. Your fingers are stained, faintly, permanently in the creases of your knuckles and under your nails, with traces of the substances you work with. Not unpleasant stains. Nothing like the inky blackness on the printer's hands you see on the Rue Saint-Jacques, or the chemical burns on the tanners down by the river. Your stains are floral, rose, absolute, iris root, a faint golden tint from benzoin, resin. You've accepted, in the perfume trade for the long term, your hands have decided before you have. The process you're working on today is the alcohol extraction. The enfleurage pomade, the fat saturated with jasmine, needs to be washed with spirits of wine to separate the scent molecules from the fat. You pour the spirits carefully over the pomade in the glass flask, using a small funnel Maître Arnaud made himself from a piece of hammered copper. The spirits go in cold. The fat swirls. The jasmine releases. You cap the flask and begin the slow rotation. 20 minutes of this. Gentle. Constant. Your wrist aches by the end, but you've learned to distribute the motion up through the forearm into the shoulder. Let the larger muscles carry it. From outside, the sound of the Rue Saint-Honoré waking up. Horses first. Always horses. Their hooves on the wet cobblestones, the particular hollow ringing sound that changes pitch depending on the stone and the weight of the load and the speed of the animal. Then wheels, the high-pitched squeal of an ungreased axle somewhere close, and behind it the deeper rumble of a heavy cart. Voices, an argument that starts somewhere to the left and resolves, or doesn't, you can't quite tell, somewhere to the right. Then the bells. Saint Roch, closest. 5 strikes. 5 o'clock. The city is fully awake. This particular street, the Rue Saint-Honoré, is where Maître Arnaud chose to place his shop, and it's worth understanding why, because where you are in Paris in 1682 tells you almost everything about who you're serving. The Rue Saint-Honoré runs roughly east to west, from the Louvre end of the old city toward the newer fashionable quartiers to the west. It's not the grandest street in Paris. That would be the boulevards that are just beginning to be cut through the old medieval fabric of the city. Wide, planted with trees, built for carriages and promenading rather than commerce. Those are the streets of the very rich. The Rue Saint-Honoré is the street of the people who serve the very rich. Perfumers, glovers, mercers, fan makers, sellers of ribbons and lace, and the 1,000 decorative necessities of a life lived at the level where decoration is necessary. The shops are narrow and deep, their fronts opening directly onto the street with folding wooden shutters that double as counters, their interiors stacked with things that cost more than they look. Maître Arnaud's shop opens at 6. By 6:15, the first customer of the day has already come and gone, a lady's maid collecting a package of scented sachets for her mistress. The sachets are lavender and clove, pressed flat, wrapped in paper stamped with Maître Arnaud's mark. The lady's maid pays without negotiation. She's been sent with a fixed sum, and leaves without meeting your eyes. You already know, without being told, what the sachets are for. They'll go into the folds of her mistress's clothes, into the wardrobe, into the chest where the bed linens are stored. Not primarily for fragrance, though fragrance is part of it, but to mask the smell that linen accumulates when it's pressed against a body that doesn't wash. A body can change its linen every day. A wealthy body can change it twice, 3 times. Louis XIV is said to change his shirt 4 or 5 times in a single day, each shirt fresh, each shirt removing the evidence of the previous hours. He goes through more linen in a week than your family in Grasse goes through in a year. But linen doesn't get everything. The skin underneath accumulates. The hair accumulates. The scalp produces oil that has nowhere to go except down, coating the hair, attracting dust, creating in the elaborate architectural confections of fashionable Parisian wigs and hair a micro-environment that is, frankly, alive in ways that its owner would prefer not to think about. There are wigs in the fashion of 1682 that are large enough to house small rodents. This has, on documented occasions, happened. You don't tell this to customers. You sell them sachets with lavender and clove, and you thank them for their business and you watch them leave. Mid-morning, Maître Arnaud sends you out. This is the part of the day you've come to love with a complicated affection that has something to do with relief and something to do with dread. The streets of Paris are not easy. They are not, in any honest assessment, pleasant. But they are endlessly, relentlessly alive, and after hours in the workshop, hours of precision, of concentration, of holding your hands still when every muscle wants to move, the chaos of the street is a kind of release. To Grégoire on the Rue des Lombards, Maître Arnaud says, handing you a small wrapped package and a folded paper. He'll know what it is. Bring back the ambergris he owes me. Real ambergris. Not the grey stone he tried to pass off last time. Check it. You know what real ambergris smells like. You do. It smells like the sea, but also like something older than the sea. Like deep water and old wood and something animal and strange underneath. It takes some people years to understand ambergris. It took you about a week. Real ambergris comes from sperm whales. Specifically, from a waxy substance that forms in the whale's intestines around indigestible matter, then eventually floats free into the ocean and washes ashore. The whales don't produce it pleasantly. The process, if you think about what it actually is, does not bear thinking about in the context of what it becomes. What it becomes is the finest fixative in perfumery, the substance that makes everything else last. That locks the scent to the skin for hours, for a day, for longer. That's the thing about perfume in 1682. Underneath the romance of it, the roses, the jasmine, the rare resins from the other side of the world, underneath all of that, the raw materials are frequently things animals produce in distress or death. Ambergris from whale intestines, musk from glands near the genitals of a small deer from the mountains of Central Asia. Civet, a paste from the scent glands of a small African cat, scraped out by hand from animals kept in small cages. The finest perfumes in France smell magnificent. The story of how they're made is something else. The streets between the Rue Saint-Honoré and the Rue des Lombards are approximately 20 minutes of walking under good conditions. 20 minutes during which Paris reveals itself in ways that no amount of prior preparation fully prepares you for, even after 9 months. You've stopped flinching at the worst of it. That was a milestone, somewhere around month 3. The smell that rises from the central gutter, the ruisseau, the stream that runs down the middle of most Paris streets carrying whatever gravity and the last rain have decided to move, no longer makes you instinctively pull your collar up over your nose. You've accepted it. You've integrated it into your understanding of the city the way you integrate the bells and the noise. It's there, constant background, not worth reacting to. But today, navigating the morning crowd, your nose is making comparisons it couldn't have made when you arrived. There are gradations to the smell of Paris, the street-level smell, the gutter, the horses, the fish sellers with their baskets, the baker's exhaust, the coal smoke from 100 chimneys. That's the democratic smell. It doesn't discriminate. It's the city's bass note, the thing underneath everything. But then there are the people, moving through the crowd at a working pace, not dawdling, not stopping except when the press of bodies forces you to, cutting left at the corner, right at the market, left again toward the river. You're close enough to people to smell them, close enough that their clothes brush yours, close enough that when a large man in a heavy coat stops suddenly in front of you and you nearly walk into his back, you get a faceful of him. The large man is wearing a coat that costs more than you'll earn this year. The coat's cut is impeccable. The brass buttons catch the morning light. His wig is massive, powdered, architecturally complex in ways that suggest both wealth and ambition. He carries a cane with a silver head. He smells of sweat and closed rooms and something faintly sweet that's trying to cover both. The something sweet is musk. It's doing its best. It's losing. You step around him and keep moving. 2 streets later, you pass a group of laundresses heading toward the river. They're carrying enormous bundles of linen on their heads, balanced without visible effort, their arms free and swinging. They're talking loudly, laughing at something. Their clothes are rough wool, mended at the elbows, their shoes worn through in places. Their hands are cracked and reddened from cold water and the lye they use for washing. They smell of river water and plain soap and the open air. They smell clean. You find Gregoire's shop on the Rue des Lombards between a candle maker and a seller of dried spices, the latter's doorway exhaling clouds of cinnamon and pepper that make your eyes water pleasantly as you pass. Gregoire himself is a compact man of perhaps 50. With a beard he keeps trimmed and eyes that move the way your masters do, cataloguing, calculating, never fully at rest. He deals in raw aromatic materials, resins and balsams and fixatives, the foundations that the perfumers build on. He has sources in every port city in France, and a network of correspondence that reaches Constantinople and the Malabar coast, and ports on the West African coast, whose names you've only seen in ledgers. "The Morel boy," he says when you come in, which is what he's called you since the second time you came here in your first month, when you didn't know enough to argue. How's the old bastard? Still pretending he invented enfleurage? He sends his regards, you say, which is not true, but is more useful than what Maître Arnaud actually said, which was something about the quality of Gregoire's products declining inversely with the quality of his excuses. And the package is? The frankincense extract, the high grade, from the last shipment. You set it on the counter. He said you'd know. I know. Gregoire picks up the package, squeezes it slightly without unwrapping it like he can read its contents through the paper. Maybe he can. And you want the ambergris. Real ambergris. A pause. Gregoire's eyes move to yours and hold there for a moment. Last time was a misunderstanding, Gregoire says smoothly, the sentence fully formed before you finish yours, which tells you this conversation has happened before. This time, look for yourself. He produces a small locked box from under the counter, opens it with a key from his belt and sets it between you. Inside, wrapped in cloth, a lump of grey material, irregular in shape, approximately the size of your fist. You pick it up carefully. It's lighter than it looks, waxy, with a smooth surface that's slightly tacky under your fingertips. You hold it to your nose. The sea, old wood, something deep and animal, something that smells like the edge of the world on a cold morning. Real ambergris. You nod. Good, Gregoire says, and the transaction proceeds. On the way back, you take the longer route, not because you need to, and not because you're afraid of the lecture that will come if you're late. The longer route takes you past a particular corner near the Palais Royal, where there is, every morning between 9 and noon, a kind of informal market in luxury goods. Second-hand items from noble households, sold by servants who may or may not have permission to sell them. Ribbons, gloves, occasionally a piece of scent bottle or a small enamel box. Objects that have been in rooms where you'll almost certainly never be invited. You stop for a moment. There's a woman selling a pair of gloves. Women's gloves, white leather, long enough to reach the elbow, embroidered at the cuff with tiny flowers in gold and blue thread. They are extraordinary. They are the kind of gloves that Maître Arnaud makes, or rather that he made before he specialised entirely in the liquid side of perfumery and subcontracted the gloving work. And you know, with the accuracy of someone who's spent 9 months learning to value things, that these are worth more than the woman is asking. But what you're looking at isn't the embroidery, it's the inside of the cuff, the leather interior where a hand would rest, where it would press against the skin for hours. Even from here, you can smell the perfume that was applied to them, violet and benzoin and something musky underneath. The scent is faded but present, weeks or months after their last wearing, which tells you something about the quality of the fixative used. But also, underneath that, barely there, almost imagined, the accumulated record of the skin they were pressed against. The body they covered. You're getting better at this, at reading what a scent is actually telling you, rather than what it wants you to think. The gloves are beautiful. The hand that wore them apparently didn't bathe. Here's what you've come to understand in 9 months of making perfume for Paris's wealthy customers, and what I need you to understand before we go any further, because without it, Versailles, where we're going, and we will get there, I promise, won't make any sense. The wealthy of 17th-century France don't smell worse than the poor because they're lazy, or because they're ignorant, or because they don't care. They smell worse because they're following advice, medical advice, the best available science of their age. The miasma theory, breathe bad air, get disease, leads directly to a conclusion that seems logical and is catastrophic. Water opens your pores, bad air enters through open pores, therefore water is dangerous, particularly hot water. Particularly the full immersion of a bath. The bath, for the fashionable French aristocracy of the 1680s, is essentially understood the way a modern person might understand knowingly drinking contaminated water. You might have no choice if there's nothing else, but you wouldn't choose it. And so they don't bathe, they change their linen constantly, obsessively, the frequency of linen changes serving as a legible social signal, a way of displaying wealth through the visible proof of cleanliness. Louis XIV is understood to be the most powerful man in France, not just because of his armies, but because he has so much linen. He has a wardrobe that is a department of government, a separate institution staffed by dozens of people that exists for no other purpose than managing his clothing. Sheets, shirts, napkins, handkerchiefs, each piece tracked, washed, dried, pressed, stored, retrieved, with a ceremonial weight that equals, sometimes exceeds, what other governments put into their diplomatic correspondence. And yet, the smell that results from never washing your body, even while you change your linen constantly, is a specific and persistent smell. It's not the sharp smell of acute exercise. It's older than that, deeper, the kind of smell that lives in the hair and in the folds of skin and in the places that linen doesn't fully reach, regardless of how often you change it. You can cover it, you can mask it, you can spray it with the finest musk and ambergris and the crushed petals of Provence roses. You can fumigate your rooms with burning herbs. You can carry a pomander stuffed with cloves to your nose when the corridor gets particularly bad, but you can't eliminate it, because the source is still there, because nobody is washing. Meanwhile, across the city, in the laundries, in the dye houses, in the households where the washing gets done, the people doing the washing are clean, not because they're trying to be, or because they know something the doctors don't, but because the work requires water, and the water is doing its job regardless of what the doctors say. The poorest woman on the Rue Saint-Honoré, the one who takes in washing for the households of 4 different masters and spends her days with her arms submerged to the elbow in cold river water with lye. She is cleaner, in the most basic physical sense, than the Duchesse de Bourgogne. This is the paradox. This is what we're going to Versailles to see. The commission comes 2 weeks later, in October, on a morning when the rain has been falling since before the bells of Saint-Roch rang for 4 o'clock, and the streets outside the workshop have turned from cobblestone to something more like a river of grey water. And what the river of grey water is made of, you're learning not to think about too carefully. Maître Arnoux is reading a letter. He reads with his whole face, the slight movement of his lips, the small tightening at the corners of his eyes, that either means comprehension or displeasure. It's difficult to tell. He sets the letter down. He picks it up again. He sets it down. "You know Versailles," he says. "Your stomach does something complicated." "I know of it," you say, which is true. Every person in France knows of Versailles. Louis XIV has been building it, expanding it, rebuilding it, adding to it, ripping out what was there and replacing it with something grander for 20 years. It was a hunting lodge before it was a palace. It was a large house before it was the centre of the known world. It is now, in 1682, the year the king has formally moved his court there, the place where everything in France ultimately originates. Laws, titles, appointments, fashion, wars. Everything flows from Versailles, the way the fountains flow from the great machinery the engineers built to force the water uphill to the gardens. A household of the court requires a delivery, maître, Arnaud says. He's watching your face in that particular way he has. A significant order. the Marquis de Revel's household. He's apparently preparing for a series of receptions and his parfumeur in Versailles. A small controlled movement of the mouth that isn't quite a smile has proved unreliable. He wants us to deliver to Versailles. He wants me to deliver to Versailles. But I have the Comtesse de Sèvres coming on Thursday, and the guild meeting on Friday, and I have neither the time nor the inclination to spend 2 days riding in a carriage to a building site. A pause. You wait. You've been here 9 months, Maître Arnaud says. You know the compositions. You've done the deliveries in Paris without losing anything or breaking anything, or, as far as I'm aware, insulting anyone. You know how to present yourself. Yes, sir. Versailles is different from Paris. He says this with a weight that suggests it's an understatement. The rules at court, what you say, how you stand, where you look, what you don't say, these are not the rules of the Rue Saint-Honoré. You're not a merchant there. You're a tradesman. The distinction matters. I understand. The delivery itself is to the Marquis's apartments. Someone will meet you at the servants' gate, the livery gate, not the main entrance, obviously, and take you through. You deliver the order, you collect the payment, all of it, the full amount. There is no negotiating with the household of a court marquis, and you leave. You don't explore. You don't ask questions. You don't stare. Yes, sir. He hands you the letter. Then the order list. Then a sealed package that has been sitting on the corner of the workbench all morning, already wrapped and tied, which means he already decided you were going before he asked you. The carriage leaves from the Rue Saint-Denis at 5 in the morning, he says. You'll want to be there early. You sleep badly, which you expected. The rain continues through the night, drumming on the garret roof in a pattern that isn't quite regular enough to be soothing. Every time it shifts, slowing to a murmur, accelerating to something that sounds like the whole sky has opened up at once. You come half awake, and the thought is there waiting. Versailles. You've heard stories from customers, from Gregoire and his network of suppliers, some of whom have dealt directly with court households, from a soldier who came into the shop in August looking for something to send his sister in Lyon and stayed for an hour telling you about the 2 years he'd spent with the household guard before an injury ended his service. The stories don't entirely agree with each other. The palace is magnificent beyond description. The palace is a building site that's been under construction for 20 years and still has areas where the walls aren't finished. The food at Versailles is the finest in Europe. The food at Versailles arrives cold because the kitchens are so far from the dining rooms that everything goes cold in transit. The gardens are paradise. The gardens smell like the swamps they were built over. The one thing the stories agree on, it's unlike anywhere else. The rules that govern normal life, the rules of streets and shops and ordinary transactions, don't apply. A different grammar operates at Versailles. A grammar so complex and so strictly enforced that people spend years learning it and still make mistakes that have consequences. You stare at the ceiling in the dark and try to calculate how badly you could fail at this. The answer is badly, quite badly, but also probably not catastrophically. You're delivering perfume. You're a tradesman. The social machinery of Versailles is calibrated to handle tradesmen. There are protocols for it. You stay in the right corridors, you speak only when spoken to, you deliver the package and collect the money and you leave. Simple. You tell yourself this until the bells ring 4 and you give up on sleep. The carriage leaves the Rue Saint-Denis at 5 as promised, or rather, the carriage arrives at 5 and departs at 5:30 because of a dispute about luggage that you don't understand and don't get involved in. standing by the wheel in the grey pre-dawn with rain dripping from the brim of your hat, the wrapped package in the leather bag across your body, the payment instructions memorised. There are 6 other passengers, a lawyer with papers in a leather portfolio that he holds on his lap rather than packing in the overhead luggage, presumably because its contents are too important to risk. A merchant, fabric, from the look of his samples bag, who falls asleep before you've cleared the city limits and doesn't wake until the carriage hits a particularly violent pothole outside of Sèvres. 2 women who might be servants of a court household, travelling back after time in Paris. They talk to each other in voices too low to follow, occasionally glancing at the others with the assessing blankness of people who have spent time in an environment where assessing others without being caught doing so is a core professional skill. And a man of perhaps 45, well dressed in the way of a prosperous official rather than a noble, who looks at the package in your bag with a curiosity he doesn't bother to disguise. Parfumeur, he says. Apprentice, you say. He nods. Who for? Maître Arnaud, Rue Saint-Honoré. Another nod, as if this means something. It probably does. Maître Arnaud's clientèle is well known in certain circles. First time to Versailles? Yes, sir. He looks at you for a moment with an expression you can't quite read. It's not pity exactly. It's something more like the look of a man who remembers his own first time and is trying to decide how useful a warning would actually be. Don't touch anything, he says finally. I won't. I mean anything. The walls, the furniture, even the curtains. Not because you'll damage them, you won't. They're stronger than they look. But because someone will notice that you touch something, and then there will be a conversation about it, and the conversation will take longer than your entire delivery. You wait to see if there's more, and breathe through your mouth the first time. Give yourself a day before you try to breathe properly. He settles back into his seat, adjusting his coat. You'll understand when you get there. The road to Versailles is 12 miles from the centre of Paris, and in October, after a night of rain, it's a sequence of ruts, puddles and stretches where the carriage slows to a walk, while the driver navigates around sections of road that have essentially ceased to be a road and begun to be a field. You watch Paris diminish behind you and try to prepare yourself for something you can't fully imagine. The city thins out, the dense urban fabric of the old quarters giving way to newer, less finished buildings, then to the market gardens that supply Paris's vegetable needs, then to open country that would be pleasant if the rain weren't still falling in thin grey curtains across the view. The merchant is still asleep. The lawyer is reading. The 2 women continue their quiet conversation. You hold the package in its leather bag and think about what's in it. 3 compositions, each sealed separately. The first, a floral, rose and iris and a thread of jasmine, light, suitable for daytime use, the kind of thing that's appropriate at public occasions where the smell of it might reach other people. The second, a heavier composition, amber-based, warm, the kind of thing that's worn in the evening, that clings. The third, a special request that Maître Arnaud spent 3 days on, and about which he said almost nothing except that it was for personal use and should be stored away from light. You don't know what's in the third one exactly. That's unusual. Maître Arnaud is not secretive about his work. Not with you, at this stage of your training. Which means either the composition is proprietary in some way, or it involves something he'd rather not explain. You've smelled it, obliquely through the sealed jar. Just the edge of it when he was working and you were at the adjacent bench and the air moved in a certain direction. something dark and rich and strange, something animal underneath the sweetness, more civet than usual, more of the fixatives that hold scent to skin, the kind of composition designed to last even when other smells are present. Versailles appears first as a horizon problem. You're looking forward through the carriage window watching the road, and the sky is grey and low, and the gardens of the town of Versailles are just beginning to be visible on either side. And then there's a point where the horizon simply stops being the horizon and becomes something else, something too regular to be natural, too large. You can't take in the dimensions. That's the first thing. Every building you know, every building you've seen in your life up to this point, in Grèce and on the road to Paris and in Paris itself, exists at a human scale. Even the grand edifices of Paris, even Notre Dame and the Louvre and the Palais Royal, exist at a scale that your eyes can comprehend. You can see where they end. You can perceive them as objects with boundaries. Versailles has no visible boundary. It extends in both directions from a central axis that must be the main courtyard approach, and it keeps extending, wing after wing, section after section. The roofline interrupted by chimneys and dormer windows and decorative elements, urns, statues, the curved tops of mansard roofs, that individually would be noteworthy and collectively become a kind of visual weather. The lawyer puts down his papers. Even the sleeping merchant wakes up without being shaken, as if the gravitational presence of the building reached through the carriage wall and touched his shoulder. There it is, the official says. Not to you specifically, to the carriage. The carriage deposits you at the edge of the town of Versailles, which has grown up around the palace with the organic opportunism of all service towns. The hotels and taverns and small shops and workshops that exist specifically because a building of this size requires the support of thousands of people who have to sleep and eat somewhere. You follow the official's directions. He gives them quickly, without sentiment, the way someone gives directions in a place they know so well it stopped being remarkable. Toward the southern side of the complex, away from the grand approach through the Place d'Armes, and toward the service entrance. The servants' gate. Even the servants' gate at Versailles is larger than the front door of the largest building in Grasse. It's guarded by two men in livery who examine your papers with the thoroughness of people who have been told, presumably, that their job is important and have decided to believe it. The papers include a letter from Maître Arnaud on his gild-sealed stationery, the order form countersigned by the Marquis's secretary, and a note in your own hand listing the contents of the package. Wait here. You wait. The courtyard visible beyond the gate is not the grand courtyard of the main approach. This is a working courtyard, cobblestoned, functional, edged with outbuildings that might be stables or storerooms or workshops. The smell that comes through the gate is not the smell of the gardens. It's not the smell of the flowers you can see in the distance, arranged in geometric perfection. It's something else, something you registered without identifying for the first several seconds, the way you sometimes smell a composition before you consciously pass its components. The first note, horses, everywhere, all the time. 17,000 people means, at a conservative estimate, several thousand horses in various states of readiness. Their stables are enormous, architecturally ambitious, designed with the same grandeur as the human quarters. The horses at Versailles live better than most French citizens. The second note, smoke. Coal and wood in combination, from 100 chimneys. Cooking fires, heating fires, the fires in the forges and workshops and laundries that keep the machinery of the court running. The third note. You're working out what the third note is when the guard comes back with a young man in the Marquis's household livery, dark blue with silver braiding, the colours slightly worn at the elbows, who introduces himself as Thomas, looks at your package, nods, and says, "Follow me." What happens next is the part the official in the carriage was warning you about. You follow Thomas through the servants' corridors of Versailles. I need to tell you what the servants' corridors of Versailles are like, because they're as important as the Hall of Mirrors, and they don't get the paintings. The palace from the outside presents one face, the gilded, symmetrical, mathematically perfect face that is designed to communicate the absolute, unquestionable, God-given supremacy of Louis XIV. Every dimension of the exterior facade was calculated. The proportions are Baroque perfection. It is a statement made in stone and gold leaf about the nature of power. The interior, the state apartments, the throne room, the gallery of mirrors continues this statement. More gold, more mirrors, more light multiplied and multiplied until the human eye gives up trying to find a limit. The servants' corridors are where the statement gets made. They're narrow, not uncomfortably narrow by the standards of most Parisian housing, but narrow relative to what's on the other side of the wall. They run behind and between the grand rooms, invisible to the people in those rooms, housing the armies of servants who keep the vast performance of Versailles running. The floors here are plain stone. The walls are plain plaster. The doors are small. There are no windows, or the windows are tiny and high, slits that admit more sound than light. And the smell. This is what the official meant. You're breathing through your mouth before you've gone 20 feet. It's not one smell. It's not even a simple combination. It's a layered, complex, ancient smell that has been accumulating in these stone corridors for decades, soaking into the walls, rising from the floors, descending from the ceilings that are black with smoke from the candles and torches that light this perpetual interior night. Underneath the human occupation, underneath the sweat and the close air, there is the specific smell of a building where approximately 17,000 people live, move, eat, sleep and relieve themselves, served by a plumbing infrastructure designed for a hunting lodge. Because that's the thing about Versailles that the paintings don't show and the tour guides sometimes skip past with some diplomatic brevity. Versailles has almost no toilets. This is not an oversight. It's a practical failure that resulted from the speed and ambition of the construction. When Louis XIV decided to move the entire court here, the entire government, the entire nobility, the entire apparatus of absolute monarchy, the building wasn't ready. The building was never really fully ready. There are, in 1682, areas of Versailles where the walls are still unplastered, where the floors are temporary, where the heating hasn't been installed, and the sanitation. What Versailles has is a small number of guard-robes, enclosed rooms with holes in the floor that drop into cesspits below, and a large number of people who use the corridors when the guard-robes are occupied or too far away. This is documented. This is not a rumour or an exaggeration. The corridors and stairwells of Versailles, particularly the servants' corridors and the back passages, are used as latrines by people who can't or won't walk to the proper facilities. The palace smells like this because the palace is this. The most magnificent building in the world, where the floors of the servants' corridors are not quite clean, ever, and where even the grand apartments above, even the rooms where Louis XIV holds his morning ceremonies and his evening entertainments and his legendary card games, cannot be fully separated from what exists beneath them. Thomas walks quickly. He knows these corridors the way you're learning to know the Rue Saint-Honoré, by muscle memory, by turns internalized to the point of unconsciousness. He doesn't react to the smell. You wonder if he even registers it anymore, or if it's become, as the Paris street smell became for you, simply the medium in which life occurs. You follow him. You breathe through your mouth. You don't touch the walls. The corridors open eventually into a back passage behind a suite of apartments on the north wing. Thomas stops at a door, knocks with a specific rhythm, and exchanges a few words with someone on the other side before turning back to you. "You'll deliver directly to the valet," he says. "Don't speak unless addressed. Don't look at anything in the apartment you don't need to look at." A pause. He seems to consider whether to say more. The Marquis may be present. Probably not at this hour. But if he is, "I understand," you say. He doesn't look entirely convinced, but he opens the door. The apartment is not the state apartments. It's not the Hall of Mirrors. It's a private suite. 3 interconnected rooms. That would be in Paris the residence of a prosperous professional man. Comfortable, well furnished, evidence of money without excess, except for the details. The wall covering is not painted plaster but silk damask. The furniture is not merely well made but gilded, the legs carved in a style that has a name you don't know and a price you couldn't calculate. The carpet on the floor, a single piece, covering the entirety of the first room, is from somewhere in the Ottoman Empire, its colours still vivid despite evident age. A fire burns in a fireplace designed to be both functional and beautiful, the mantel carved with garlands and faces. A valet, older than Thomas, perhaps 40, with the particular quality of stillness that long service in close quarters produces, the ability to be present without being obtrusive, takes your package with a practiced smoothness and sets it on a small table. He examines the seal, examines the order form you produce. "Arnaud," he says. "Good." Like this is confirmation of something. And then, from the inner room, a voice. The valet's expression doesn't change. He crosses to the inner door, opens it a careful 6 inches, says something too quiet to hear, listens, returns to you. The Marquis will receive you. You've been told not to stare. You stare anyway. Just slightly. Just with the peripheral awareness that's become second nature in 9 months of paying attention to what people look like versus how they present themselves. The part of you that's trained to read appearances, the linen, the skin, the hands, the things that the perfume is doing and the things it's failing to do. The Marquis de Reval is perhaps 50. He's dressed in a brocade robe over his shirt and breeches, an informal morning garment that suggests he's not planning to be at court this morning or doesn't need to perform for it yet. His wig, he's wearing one even in his private apartment at this hour, which tells you something about the psychological architecture of life at court, is smaller than the one you'd expect for formal occasions. His face is carefully shaved. His hands, resting on the arms of the chair he's seated in, are manicured. He smells of musk and benzoin and something floral underneath. He smells of Maître Arnaud's work, or work like Maître Arnaud's, which tells you he's been using quality perfume for some time. The composition is good, the application is heavy, the heaviness is doing a job. You don't think about it too consciously, but you register it. "From Arnaud," the Marquis says. "Not a question." "Yes, Monsieur le Marquis." The 3 compositions. "Yes, sir." The floral, the amber composition, and You hesitate, but not enough to be noticed. The third, as specified. Something moves in his expression. Satisfaction or relief, or perhaps just the particular pleasure of a man who's ordered something expensive and knows it's arrived correctly. You know what they're for, presumably. I know what's in them, you say carefully. My master didn't explain the specific application. A pause. The Marquis looks at you with an assessment that isn't hostile exactly, but is very complete, the kind of look that decides things. How old are you? 17, Monsieur le Marquis. From Grasse? Yes, sir. And Arnaud trusts you with this delivery. He does. Another pause, longer. The fire crackles. From somewhere beyond the outer rooms comes a distant sound. A door, voices, the general ambient noise of a building full of people going about the business of power. The third composition, the Marquis says, is for this room. He gestures, not at the room specifically, at the air in the room. Not for wearing, for the atmosphere. You understand. The room is fumigated with it. The fabric, the curtains, the carpets. They absorb the perfume the way the enfleurage fat absorbs jasmine. The smell of the room becomes the composition, deployed against whatever the room contains, against whatever accumulates in a room that belongs to a man who doesn't bathe. The valet shows you out through a different route, shorter, less fragrant than the way Thomas brought you in, following a corridor that must run along the outer wall of the building because there's a small window every 15 feet, and through the windows comes air, actual air. September cold, rain-smelling, carrying the muted scent of the gardens. You breathe. At the money exchange, conducted with the valet, not the Marquis, which is how these things are handled, you collect the full amount without negotiation. 83 livres in coin, counted out with the same efficiency that governed the whole transaction. No shortfall. No attempt at 40 instead of 43. Apparently certain things work differently at court than they do on the Rue Saint-Honoré. You sign the receipt. The valet signs his copy. Thomas appears from nowhere to lead you back to the servants' gate. On the way out, Thomas takes a wrong turn, or what seems like a wrong turn. You're not sure he makes wrong turns. He's too familiar with these corridors, too calibrated in his movements, but the route you take back toward the gate is longer than the route you took coming in, and it takes you through a section of the building you haven't seen. A wider corridor, more traffic, servants moving quickly, heads down, carrying things, linens, trays, chamber pots, carried with the matter-of-fact purposefulness of people for whom this is simply a task and not something to look away from. And at one point, a staircase, not the grand staircases, one of the back staircases, stone, unlit except by a single candle in a bracket at the landing. Thomas starts up without slowing, and you follow. At the landing there's a window. It faces inward, into the courtyard of the Marble Court, the central courtyard of the palace, the one that was the original hunting lodge before the expansion swallowed it. The rain has stopped finally. The cobblestones are wet and dark and reflecting the grey sky. People are crossing the courtyard. Nobles mostly, or people dressed as nobles, in the elaborate performance of daily life at Versailles. A group of 4 men in conversation, their coats so richly embroidered that the fabric seems to have no underlying colour, just gold and silver and coloured thread. A woman in a gown of dark red with the train being managed by a page who trots along behind her at a precise angle. From this high, this distance, they look like figures in an illustration. You watch for a moment. Just a moment, because Thomas is still moving, and you can't fall behind. Beautiful, you think. And then, under all that beauty, underneath the gold thread and the silk and the elaborate architecture of wig and powder, under all of it, the same body as the laundress on the Rue Saint-Honoré, the same skin, producing the same oils, the same sweat, the same biology, universal and unimpressed by rank or wealth or the opinions of physicians. The difference is that the laundress knows what her body does and deals with it. These people, in their gilded perfection, are dealing with it differently. They're paying Maître Arnaud's apprentice to bring them something to put on top of it. Thomas deposits you at the servants' gate with the same efficiency he showed at the apartment door. "Safe journey back," he says. It's polite but not warm. It's the formula. You say thank you. You mean it more than he knows, though you couldn't explain exactly what for. The gate closes behind you. You stand in the street outside Versailles, the service street, not the grand approach, lined with the small businesses that service the court. And you breathe, actually breathe, not through your mouth, not as a defensive measure, but properly, the way you breathe when you're working at the bench and the composition is coming right and your body is operating at full capacity. The air out here smells of rain and horses and wet stone and a bakery somewhere to the east, sending out clouds of bread steam that the cold morning catches and holds. It smells like the outside of things, like the world that persists when you're not inside the most powerful building in France. Your package has been delivered. The money is in the inner pocket of your coat where you put it immediately and where you've been aware of it as a weight and a warmth for the last hour, the way you're aware of anything valuable. The carriage back to Paris departs from the town square at noon. You have 2 hours. You spend one of them in a tavern near the square eating something hot from a bowl that you don't ask too many questions about. There's bread to go with it. Real bread. Dense and slightly sour, the kind that fills you up and stays filled. You eat slowly because there's time and because after the morning's concentrated attention to everything around you, eating without attending to anything except the food feels like luxury. The tavern is full of the service class of Versailles, suppliers, tradesmen, servants on their half days, people who exist in orbit around the palace without being of it, who know it the way a planet knows a sun, by its gravity, by its light, by the way everything tilts in its direction. The conversation at the tables around you is the conversation of people who see behind the curtain every day and have made a pragmatic peace with what they see there. The Duc de Mortemart's household, someone says, a supplier by the look of his leather apron, owes me for 3 deliveries. 3. I've sent word twice. Send it again and add a penalty, the woman across from him says. They all pay eventually. They just see how long you'll wait first. How long? Until it starts to embarrass them. You spend the second hour walking, not toward the palace, not toward the grand approach with its avenue of trees and its approaching geometry. You walk in the other direction, along the edge of the gardens where the public can walk, a deliberate policy of Louis XIV's. The gardens open on certain days to anyone properly dressed, and you stop when you find a rise in the ground that gives you a view, not a view of the palace, a view past it, the countryside of the Ile-de-France stretching north and east, low and green and wet from the morning's rain. Villages in the middle distance, their church towers marking their positions like small flags. Fields being worked. You can see, even from here, the tiny figures of people moving across them. Harvest is late in some places this year. The ordinary world, the world that exists whether Versailles does or not. You think about the Marquis in his apartment, the compositions you delivered, The third one, for the room rather than the body, filling the space with a scent designed to sit on top of the smell of a life lived without water. You think about the laundresses on the Rue Saint-Honoré, clean by accident, clean as a byproduct of work, possessing without knowing it the thing that the most powerful people in France are attempting to purchase in a jar. There's something in this that you don't have a word for yet. Not quite irony, not quite injustice. Something in between. The particular French term for the way things come out inverted. The way the logic of a situation produces an outcome that the logic itself didn't intend. The doctor said water was dangerous. The rich believed them and stayed dirty. The poor had no choice about the water and became clean. The rich hired perfumers to manage the consequence. You're the perfumer. On the carriage back to Paris, you sit in the same seat you occupied this morning. The official is there again. He's going back the same day, apparently. He doesn't ask you directly how it went, but he looks at you with the question. Fine, you say. You saw things. Yes. Were you surprised? You think about this. About the corridors. About the smell. About the valet counting coins with the efficiency of a man who's counted coins all his professional life and regards the whole business as a function, not an activity. By some things, you say. He nods, as if this is the right answer, as if being surprised by some things and not others is the appropriate calibration. The people who work there, you say, after a moment, the servants, Thomas and the valet, and you gesture at the category. They don't seem unhappy. They're not unhappy, the official says. Mostly, it's work. It's good work compared to most of the alternatives. They eat regularly. They have a roof. The proximity to power is its own kind of intoxication, even from the servant's position. A pause. What you're noticing is that they've adapted. The smell, the rules, the proximity to people who treat them as part of the furniture. They've adapted the way people adapt to anything they live with long enough. And the smell specifically. Something happens in his expression. The smell, he says, is the price of admission for everyone there. The servants live with it. The nobles produce it. The court exists inside it. The only people who don't pay the price are the ones who come from outside and go back again. He looks at your coat, at the leather bag that carried the package. Like you. Paris appears on the horizon in the late afternoon as a density of darkness against a sky that's going orange and grey. The smoke from 100,000 chimneys rises and meets and forms a layer, a permanent weather system of human origin that sits above the city like a second roof. Below it, the lights are beginning to come on. The candles in the windows, the torches above the grand doorways, the lanterns of the night watch beginning their rounds. The carriage rattles over the cobblestones of the city gate, and you're back. The smell of Paris closes over you again. Gutter, horses, bread, coal. And after the day you've had, it smells of all things clean. Back at the workshop, Maître Arnaud is still at the bench. Of course he is. You set the coins on the counter. You give your account of the delivery. He listens without interrupting. The whole of it, the corridor, the apartment, the valet, the marquis, with the attention of a man whose information gathering is professional rather than personal. Not curiosity, assessment. When you're done, he's quiet for a moment. The third composition, he says, he's using it to fumigate the room. Yes, sir. Good, that's the right use for it. He picks up the coins, counts them, sets them in the box. You did well. Thank you. He turns back to the bench. His hands find their work again. the measuring, the pouring, the eternal patient processing of materials into something that smells better than its origins. There's something strange about it, you say. You say it before you've decided to say it, which is unusual for you. The day has loosened something. He doesn't turn around, but he doesn't keep talking either, which is his version of continue. The poor people wash, you say. Not because they want to, because the work requires it. The laundresses, the dyers, the people who carry water, who work near the river. A pause. They're the cleanest people in the city, by accident. Yes, Maître Arnaud says, and the rich are the dirtiest, also by accident. By the accident of believing what the doctors tell them. Yes, and we. You gesture at the workshop, at the compositions in their flasks, at the whole enterprise of what you're learning. We're the solution to their problem. A pause, longer than the others. We're the solution they can afford, Maître Arnaud says, that they're willing to accept. He picks up a flask, examines it against the lamp, sets it down. A physician who told a noble he needed to sit in water would lose his position. A parfumeur who tells him his room smells of it, and then provides something to correct the situation, stays employed. Stays employed. He turns back to the bench. The doctors will change their advice, he says. Eventually, these things shift. New evidence accumulates, or someone persuasive argues a different position, or a fashion dies and takes its justification with it. In 20 years, in 50, bathing might be fashionable, might be required. The court physicians might start prescribing water instead of forbidding it. And perfumery? Perfumery, he says, without inflection, will still exist, because the smell was never only about not bathing. It's about everything underneath, everything the body does, everything the world deposits on you, everything that accumulates in a day of being alive. He measures something into a flask with a precision that allows for no error. Perfume is the civilization that sits on top of the animal, he says. The animal isn't going anywhere. We're just making it easier to be around. That night later, you lie in the dark of the garret and you do what you've been doing since you arrived in Paris. You learn. Not from a book, from the day. The smell of the servants' corridor at Versailles, the weight of the official's phrase, the price of admission, the marquis in his brocade robe surrounded by the evidence of wealth so dense it had its own weather, smelling of Maître Arnaud's work and the life underneath it. The laundresses moving through the morning market with their bundles of other people's linen, their cracked red hands, their loud laughing voices, the paradox of it, the beautiful, terrible paradox. The most powerful people in France are paying you, paying your master, paying the guild, paying the whole elegant infrastructure of the perfume trade, to cover up the thing that proves, below the level of all argument, that power can't buy everything. It can buy almost everything. It can buy gold on the walls and silk on the floors and the finest food in Europe arriving cold from kitchens a quarter-mile away. It can buy the labour of 17,000 people, deployed in service of one family's desire for grandeur. It can't buy a body that doesn't need washing. That's a universal. That's the animal underneath, indifferent to rank. The poor laundress, knee-deep in cold river water, arms burning with effort, who goes home smelling of soap and open air, she is, in this one specific way, living better than the Marquis, de Rival. She's living in her own body. He's living in a performance of it, scented and disguised and managed at considerable expense, the real thing hidden behind compositions that Maître Arnaud spent 3 days on. The week after Versailles passes in the ordinary rhythms, morning extractions, noon deliveries, Afternoon blending. The Comtesse de Sèvres comes on Thursday, and you help Maître Arnaud present the autumn compositions, a series of heavier, warmer things, the seasonal shift from the light florals of summer to the darker amber and resin-heavy work that makes sense when the air is cold, and the days are short and people spend more time in enclosed spaces. The Comtesse is a woman of perhaps 60, who has been wearing Maître Arnaud's work for 20 years and has opinions about it the way a serious musician has opinions about their instrument. She smells each composition carefully, with a concentration that is, you've come to recognize, entirely genuine. This is not performance. She is actually doing the thing she appears to be doing, assessing, comparing, forming judgments. This one, she says, indicating the third flask from the left. What's the base? Benzoin and labdanum, Maître Arnaud says. Iris root for depth. The floral element is rose absolute from Grasse. The new boy brought the stock in himself. He glances at you. Not a performance, not a selling point, just accuracy. The Comtesse looks at you for the first time. She has the same assessing quality as the valet at Versailles, the ability to form a complete judgment rapidly, and then not revise it unnecessarily. Grasse, she says. Yes, madame. You can smell the difference, she says, between grass rose and the Turkish. She says it to Maître Arnaud, not to you, but it's you she's referring to. He can, Maître Arnaud says. Keep him then. The seasons begin to turn. October deepens. The last of the October warmth, the few days of clear cold sunshine that occur between the autumn rains, comes and goes in the space of a week. By November, Paris is what it will be until spring. Grey, damp, smoky, the sky a low, permanent ceiling that occasionally drops close enough to feel personal. You work, you learn. Maître Arnaud teaches the way he does everything. Not through instruction, but through proximity and correction. He works and you watch, and then you work and he watches, and the correction is applied precisely at the point of error, without elaboration or sympathy, which is actually the best possible method if you're paying attention. You're paying attention. He teaches you the raw materials, not their catalogue properties, which you learnt from books in Grèce before you left, but their behaviour, how they change over time, how they interact, how a composition smells when you first blend it, and how it smells 2 days later, and how it smells a week later on the skin of someone wearing it in a warm room. Perfume is not a thing. Perfume is a process. Everything he tells you adds to the picture you've been building since Versailles, the picture of what the work is actually for, what it's doing in the world. In December, there's a night when it snows. This is unusual in Paris. Not unprecedented, but unusual enough that the first morning after, the city is genuinely quiet for perhaps an hour. That particular winter quiet that happens when the snow covers the stones and the horses aren't out yet and the whole vast mechanical noise of the city has been muffled into something almost peaceful. You stand in the doorway of the workshop in the early morning, before Maître Arnaud is awake, or, more likely, before he comes downstairs and you breathe. Snow-cold air, the smell of the city quieted to its fundamentals. Smoke, from chimneys that have been burning all night to keep people from freezing. Stone, cold stone, the smell of minerals in cold air. The faint ghost of the Seine, the constant below everything note that Paris never entirely sheds. And something else, something almost absent. A ghost of jasmine from the workshop behind you. It's ridiculous. Jasmine in December. Jasmine in Paris. Jasmine that has travelled from Grasse in sealed jars and lived in enfleurage fat for weeks, and is still here, still itself, the cells of summer captured in cold fat on a workbench. You breathe it. And then the snow shifts, a small collapse from the edge of the roof above you, a soft explosion of white onto the step, and the jasmine is gone. Just snow-cold Paris again. Just this. The Comtesse de Sèvres sends a note in January. She's hosting a series of receptions in February, in conjunction with some court obligation that the note doesn't specify. She wants 12 compositions, various suited for various occasions, some for personal use, and some for fumigation of her reception rooms. It's the biggest single order Maître Arnaud has received in the time you've been with him. You know this because he tells you, which is itself unusual. He shows you the list. 12 compositions. 3 he can do from existing stock with modification. 5 require new work. 4 require materials he'll need to source. Grégoire, you say. Grégoire for the fixatives, the rose absolute. I'll need more than I have. Write to your father's contact in Grasse. He hands you the list. And for the fumigation compositions, I want you to think about what we saw at Versailles, what the third composition was doing in the Marquis's apartment. Apply that thinking to an enclosed reception room. Larger space, more people. What's the problem? What's the solution? You take the list. You think about the Marquis's apartment, the air in it, the smell that the composition was working against. You think about the servants' corridors, the price of admission. You think about 17,000 people who don't bathe, dressed in silk and gold, filling their enclosed spaces with the accumulated fact of their bodies, and the perfumers who exist to manage the consequence. I'll work it out, you say. Yes, Maître Arnaud says, you will. That evening, working late at the bench while Maître Arnaud is upstairs with his accounts, you begin, not with materials yet, with paper, with the problem stated clearly before you try to solve it. A reception room, enclosed, winter, fire burning, warm, which accelerates everything. 100 people in it for several hours. People who dress well and smell of their clothing and their last application of scent. People whose bodies have been doing what bodies do for weeks without the intervention of water. The composition needs to fill the room without overwhelming it. Needs to sit on top of what's there without fighting it. You fight a smell. The fight is what you notice, not the resolution. Needs to be something that reads as appropriate to the occasion. Warm, sophisticated, an atmosphere rather than a perfume. Not jasmine, too sweet, too obvious. Not rose, same problem at high concentration. Something darker, benzoin for warmth, a thread of labdanum for depth. Sandalwood as the carrier, slow releasing, persistent, and something to fix it to the room, to the fabrics. You write for an hour. Outside, Paris does what Paris does at night, continues obstinately, noisily, smellily, beautifully, its hundreds of thousands of lives conducting themselves in the dark. From upstairs, the occasional creak of floorboards, the scratch of Maître Arnaud's pen. The candle on your bench burns down to a stub. You light another. February comes, and the Comtesse's receptions, and you make 6 of the 12 compositions yourself. Not unsupervised. Maître Arnaud checks each one, adjusts 2 of them, approves the rest, but substantially yours. Your thinking, your choices, your hands. The fumigation composition for the reception room is one of them. The Comtesse sends a note afterward. Not to you, to Maître Arnaud, but he shows it to you. 2 sentences. The first thanks him for the work. The second says the atmosphere in the reception rooms was, and this is the phrase, comme si quelqu'un avait ouvert une fenêtre. As if someone had opened a window. You read the phrase twice. Like someone had opened a window. Not like it smelled of flowers. Not like perfume. Like the thing underneath the perfume had been addressed. Like the room had been allowed to breathe. That's the best thing a fumigation composition can do. That's what it means to solve the problem correctly. Not to replace the smell, but to lift it. Maître Arnaud sets the note down. She'll order it again, he says. Yes, sir. You should write down exactly what you used, the proportions, all of it. You already have. You've been writing things down since October, since Versailles, since the official on the carriage said breathe through your mouth the first time and you understood, without being told the rest, that there was a rest to be told. You have a notebook now. It started as a record of compositions and has become something else, something harder to name, a record of what the work is actually about, what the materials are doing and why, what the people who buy them need and what they think they need, and the distance between the two. Spring arrives, as it always does, without announcement. The particular smell of Paris in spring, the smell of the Seine warming, the smell of the market gardens coming back to life, the smell of something that isn't quite cleanness, but is at least the memory of it, has become, in the 9 months since you arrived, and the 5 months since Versailles, a smell you know. You walk to work in the morning and the city is there around you, doing what it does, and you're there in it, doing what you do, and the distance between the person who stepped off the carriage from Grasse a year ago and the person crossing the Rue Saint-Honoré now is not enormous, not unrecognizable, but real. You know things. You know the guild rules and the prices and which materials to trust from which suppliers. You know the Comtesse de Sèvres' taste and the Comtesse de Villa's tendency to negotiate, and you know now the smell of a building that houses more people than its sanitation can manage, and you know what it costs to cover that smell, and you know who pays the cost. You know that the laundresses are cleaner than the Marquis. You know why. You know that the Marquis knows this too on some level, in the place where knowledge lives below the arguments you tell yourself, in the body that produces the problem regardless of what the doctors say. I want to stop here for a moment just before we go to sleep and tell you something about ambergris. Not the technical aspects. You know those now, or you know enough of them. The whale, the intestine, the sea, the shore. What I want to tell you is this. Ambergris, when it first leaves the whale, smells terrible. The smell is exactly what you'd expect from its origin. There's nothing redeemable about it. If you encountered it on a beach in its initial state, you would walk away from it as quickly as the laundresses walk away from the worst of the Paris gutter. But then it floats, months, sometimes years, in the open ocean. Sun and salt water and the constant movement. The terrible smell bleaches out. What's left is the fixative, the deep, oceanic, ancient thing that holds other scents to the skin and makes them last. The origin doesn't change, it's still what it was. But the passage through the world changes what it does. That's the trade, in a way. That's what Maître Arnaud does, and what you're learning to do. You take the things the world produces, flowers and resins and the secretions of animals, the raw biological facts of life on earth, and you find in them the things worth keeping. The smell of the noble's apartment and the smell of the servant's corridor are both made of the same raw material. The human body. The body that everyone has that doesn't distinguish between noble and laundress. that performs its functions with democratic persistence regardless of who owns it. The difference is what you do with it afterward. On a warm evening in May, Maître Arnaud takes a delivery himself, a rare event, to the household of a duke near the Palais Royal. He leaves you in charge of the shop for 2 hours. You sell 3 small packages and a bottle of toilet water to a very young woman who came in alone, which is itself unusual, and who spent 20 minutes in the shop smelling everything on the counter before selecting something light and green and slightly sharp. "What is this?" she asks, holding the bottle. "Rosemary and citrus," you say. "With a thread of oak moss. It's not sweet. It's more like," you think, "like being outside, like standing in a garden in the morning." "Like before the heat," she says. "Exactly." She looks at you for a moment. Not the assessing look. Something less calculated, more like recognition. "It's what they smell like in the country," she says. "The people who work outside, they smell like this." "Yes," you say. She buys it. Morning comes the way mornings always come in Paris in late spring. Not with light exactly, but with the reduction of darkness. The sky above the garret window moves from black to a dark blue-grey that isn't quite night anymore. And your body knows this before your mind does, because your body has been calibrated to this specific window and this specific light for almost a year now. The bells of Saint-Roch ring 4. You're already awake. 3 weeks after the Comtesse de Sèvres' receptions, Maître Arnaud receives another letter from Versailles. This one isn't from the Marquis de Rival. It's from someone whose name you don't recognize, a secretary's name, the kind of name that functions as a title rather than an identity. The name of a person who writes letters on behalf of someone who doesn't write their own correspondence. The letter is formal, sealed with a crest that Maître Arnaud identifies without explaining how he recognizes it, and it requests a second delivery, this time not to the household of a marquis, to a different location in the palace, a household that is, the letter makes clear without saying it directly, considerably more significant. Maître Arnaud reads the letter twice, folds it, sets it down, reads it again. Then he looks at you. "The Comtesse de Sèvres mentioned you," he says. "Me specifically?" The composition for the reception rooms. "She told someone at court who told someone." He taps the letter. Word travels when it's the right word. "Who is it for?" A pause. The particular pause that precedes information being released in measured quantities rather than all at once. "The letter is from the household of the Comtesse de Montespon," he says. "You know the name. Everyone in France knows the name. Françoise Athénaïse de Rochechouart de Mortemart, Marquise de Montespan, the king's principal mistress for the better part of 15 years. The woman who managed through intelligence and beauty and a political acuity that most of the king's ministers would have envied, to maintain her position at the centre of the most competitive social environment in Europe, through wars and rivals and the birth of 7 illegitimate children who have since been legitimised and given titles. She is no longer the king's first mistress. That position belongs now to Madame de Maintenon, the quiet, formidable widow who replaced Montespan's brilliance with something more lasting than brilliance. But Montespan is still at Versailles, still in her apartments, still a person of consequence in the elaborate architecture of the court, still, presumably, in need of good perfume. The composition they want, Maître Arnaud says, is for personal use, not for the rooms, for her. He sets the letter aside, begins organising his bench with a focus that tells you the decision has already been made. "I'll need 3 days to develop it," he says. "Then you'll deliver." Me again. "You know the corridors now, and a fractional pause, the kind that contains a compliment in concentrated form. You've demonstrated judgment. You think about the servants' corridors, the smell. Thomas moving quickly without reacting. Yes, sir, you say. The 3 days Maître Arnaud spends on the composition are unlike any 3 days you've spent in the workshop. He doesn't let you watch. Not closely. He works at the main bench in the way that belongs to him alone, the private work, the thinking through hands work. And you occupy the secondary bench with your own assignments, routine preparations, the restocking of standard compositions. You're physically present. You're not present for the work he's doing. But you can smell it. That's unavoidable. The workshop is one room. The smells don't know they're meant to be private. And what you smell, building over 3 days in layers you track without intending to, is something you've never encountered before. The first day, a bass note, something warm and deep and fundamentally serious. Not sweet, not floral, not light in any sense. You identify benzoin and labdanum, the foundations you know, but underneath them, something older and more complex, something animal in the best sense. The sense in which certain smells connect directly to the part of the brain that operates below language, below decision, at the level where response is immediate and involuntary. The second day, the heart note develops. This is where Maître Arnaud's skill is most visible, even from a distance, even through the medium of smell rather than observation. The heart note is what a composition becomes 5 or 10 minutes after application, what you smell when the volatile top notes have evaporated and the underlying structure reveals itself. His heart note, building slowly over the second day, has rose in it, but not the light rose of summer florals, something heavier, richer, the rose of late season, the rose that's been warm, behind it, iris root, and something else you're struggling to identify. The third day, fixatives. This is where ambergris enters. You know the smell of real ambergris now, this sea and the deep water and the ancient animal thing. He uses it here, but more, something else is in it too. Something that takes you most of the morning to isolate from the rest of the composition. Civet. You've worked with civet before. It's a standard fixative, expensive, difficult to obtain in good quality, powerful enough that even a small amount wrong will destroy a composition. Raw civet in quantity smells exactly like what it is, the anal gland secretion of a small African cat. It's not subtle, it's not pleasant in isolation. It smells of animal and musk and something acrid underneath. But in the right concentration, in the right composition, as a base note rather than a feature, civet does something no other fixative does. It gives a composition a quality of warmth that is specifically, inescapably, bodily. It smells, at the right dilution, like warm skin, like a person. Not any specific person, but the idea of a person, the fact of a body, the warmth of physical presence. That's what Maître Arnaud is adding to the third day's work. The composition, when he finishes it on the evening of the third day, smells like this. It opens cold, almost green, almost sharp, and within 30 seconds it becomes warm and deep and present, and it makes you feel, with a certainty that bypasses logic, that you are not alone in the room. It's the most extraordinary thing you've ever smelled. He seals it without asking your opinion. He knows you've been smelling it. He doesn't address it. But when he hands you the wrapped package on the morning of the delivery, he says, "Don't open it." I wouldn't. Not because you'll contaminate it. A pause. because you're not ready to smell it without wanting to change something. And it's done. Don't look at finished work that way. You think about this on the carriage to Versailles, what it means that a composition can be done, what it means that looking at finished work with the desire to improve it is itself a kind of error. You think you understand. The way you understand most things Metrano tells you, not all at once, but in pieces, the meaning assembling over time. A composition is a decision made at a specific moment with specific materials and specific knowledge. The moment passes. The decision is the thing. Opening it afterward, with more knowledge, with better judgment, with the benefit of days of smelling what it became rather than what you intended, that would be changing the decision using information the decision didn't have. That's not improvement. That's second-guessing across time. The composition belongs to the day it was made. Versailles in late spring is different from Versailles in October. The gardens first. The gardens are not metaphorically beautiful. They're not beautiful in the way that requires adjustment to your expectations or a willingness to meet them halfway. They're beautiful in the way that 3,000 workers over 20 years produces beauty when directed by a man, André Lenotre, who understood geometry and water and the way the human eye wants to move through space. The carriage approaches from the Avenue de Paris and the scale hits you differently today than it did in October. In October the sky was grey and the rain was falling and the building was a form, a mass, an overwhelming thing. Today the sky's high and blue and the whole complex is in colour. The stone pale gold in the morning light, the gardens geometrically green and flowering and stretching away in every direction with the planted confidence of something that knows it has nowhere to hurry to. The fountains are running. This requires the king's permission. The fountains only run when Louis XIV is in residence and chooses to permit them, because the water system, the machine de Marly, 14 enormous water wheels driving a chain of pumps that lifts the Seine water uphill to Versailles, cannot run the fountains and supply the palace's other needs simultaneously. When the fountains run, something else stops. But the fountains are running today. Water falls in mathematically calculated arcs from basins edged with stone figures. Neptune, Apollo, the months of the year, the elements. All of it controlled and directed and placed with a precision that turns nature into a statement about power. Water doesn't just flow here. Water performs. From the gate, even the servants' gate, you can hear them. The guide this time is not Thomas. Thomas apparently is occupied with other duties, the vague category of other duties that serves as the all-purpose explanation for anything at Versailles that isn't your business. Your guide is a woman. She introduces herself as Marguerite, says it quickly and without flourish, the way people say things they've said 10,000 times. She's perhaps 35, plain dressed in the way that says, I dress plainly because I choose to, not because I have no choice, with a quality of movement through the corridors that is even more efficient than Thomas's. She doesn't navigate the corridors, she inhabits them, the way water inhabits a riverbed it has spent years shaping. She doesn't make small talk. She leads you through a different route than Thomas's, not the outer corridors with their small high windows, but something deeper in the palace, further from the external walls, a network of passages that feels, to your developing understanding of this building's internal geography, like the space between the walls rather than the walls themselves. The sound in here is different. When you were here in October, The corridors add the particular soundscape of servants at work, footsteps, the occasional voice, the distant clatter of domestic activity. This corridor is quieter, and the quiet has a quality that you notice first as an absence, and then, gradually, as something specific. Music. Somewhere above you, one floor up, maybe two, the acoustics in these stone passages make distances elastic. Someone is playing a harpsichord, not practicing, not running scales, not warming up, playing. Something formal and measured and precise, the way all music at Versailles is formal and measured and precise, as if even the private moments here have been choreographed in advance. The music comes and goes as you move through the corridors, closer, then muffled, then clear again, a thread of it tracking you through the stone. You think about a man sitting at a harpsichord somewhere above your head, and wonder whether he knows there are people in the passages below, and whether it matters. Madame de Montespon's apartments are in the main building, not the north wing, not the south wing, not the outbuildings, the main building, on the first floor above the ground floor, where the rank is measured in proximity to the king's apartments, and proximity to the king's apartments is measured in the social currency of Versailles that has no equivalent outside it. Margaret stops at a door. She doesn't knock immediately. She waits 30 seconds, 40, and you wait with her, not asking why, because you've spent enough months learning from a man who doesn't explain himself to recognize when the pause is the instruction. Then she knocks. Two quiet sounds, specific. The door opens. The room is larger than the Marquis's apartment. Not dramatically larger. You're not in the state apartments, not in the gallery, not in any space that exists to communicate grandeur to the public. This is private space. Private by Versailles standards, which means it's a suite of 5 rooms rather than 3, and the dimensions are slightly grander, and the furniture is marginally more extraordinary, and the paintings on the walls are by people whose names you know, because in Grasse even a child learns the names of the painters the king commissions. The light is good. Windows facing the gardens, and the gardens today are in full spring colour, and the light through the windows is the particular warm light that only happens when the sun is high and the sky is actually blue. A woman is standing at one of the windows. She's not facing you. She's facing the gardens. One hand rests on the window frame, not gripping it, resting. Her dress is a deep blue silk that does something specific with the morning light, absorbing it and returning it changed. Her hair, her own hair, not a wig, which tells you something about the informality of the moment, is dark and dressed simply, as court hair goes. She doesn't turn around immediately. She's looking at the fountains. You wait. From Arnaud, she says, not a question. Yes, madame. Put it on. The table by the door. You place the package on the table, she indicates. Small marquetry top, a piece of furniture that serves no purpose except to hold things temporarily. A long pause. The fountains make their sound through the window glass. Then she turns. You've been told not to stare. You don't stare. But the preparation you did, not for this specifically, but the general preparation of someone who pays attention to people and their appearances and what appearances say, processes the information it receives. She is now in her early 40s, the beauty that made her famous when she arrived at court, the beauty that is in every portrait commissioned during the years when she was the sun around which other women arranged themselves. That beauty is still present, but it's different. Less like a weapon now, more like a fact. She has the eyes of someone who has spent years at the centre of absolute power and has developed necessarily the ability to assess everything in front of her with a completeness that leaves nothing out. Her eyes move from your face to the package to your face again in a second. "He trained you himself?" she says. "Yes, madame." "How long have you been with him?" "Almost a year." "From Grasse?" "Yes, madame." A pause that's evaluative rather than conversational. "Tell me what's in it." You think of Metriano's voice. You're not ready to smell it without wanting to change something. "I know the composition," you say carefully. "He would prefer to describe it himself if—" "Arnaud isn't here. You are." Not hostile, not sharp. Simply factual in the way that people who have spent years at court have learned to state facts as if they were universal laws. "Tell me." You think of the 3 days, the smells building, the bass note, the heart note, the fixatives. The base is benzoin and labdanum, you say. Warm, grounding. Then rose, not the light summer rose, something heavier, iris root behind it, for depth and a kind of powdery softness. The fixatives are ambergris and, a half-second pause, civet. Something moves in her expression, the very smallest thing. "The civet," she says, "in low concentration. It adds warmth, skin warmth." You stop. She looks at you for a long moment. "Arnaud used it before," she says, "years ago. He got the concentration wrong. Too much." A pause. "You know what too much civet smells like." "Yes, madam." "And this one?" "I believe he got it right this time. The concentration is—" You think about what you smelled over 3 days, the building, the architecture of the thing. The civet doesn't announce itself. It's not a note. It's what holds the other notes to the skin. It's what makes the rose warm instead of cold. She turns back to the window. "Warm instead of cold," she says. "Yes, that's exactly right." A pause. "He trained you well," she says. It's addressed to the garden rather than to you. It's not a compliment exactly. It's an observation. And at Versailles, observations from this woman are the currency other places use gold for. "Thank you, madame." She doesn't dismiss you directly. She simply stops engaging, which is, you understand quickly, the same thing. Her attention moves elsewhere, to the garden, to the fountains, to something in her own mind that isn't the apprentice standing by the door. The maid, who has been standing silently in the corner of the room, you'd almost forgotten her, steps forward and indicates the door with a movement so minimal it's barely a gesture. You take the payment from the maid. You leave. Marguerite is waiting in the corridor. She says nothing. She leads you back through the passages, a different route again. She seems constitutionally unable to take the same route twice. Or maybe the routes are variable for reasons that have nothing to do with efficiency, and everything to do with whose business is whose. Until you're back at the gate, back in the service street, back in the sunlight. "Good delivery," she says. First words since she introduced herself. "Thank you." She goes back inside. You stand in the street for a moment. The fountains, even here, on this side of the palace, in the street full of suppliers and tradesmen and the general service life of the court, you can still hear them. The water performing its continuous, expensive, mechanically engineered miracle. You think about the composition, about the rose that's warm rather than cold, about the civet that holds everything to the skin without announcing itself. You think about the woman at the window looking at the gardens, about the way she said warm instead of cold as if she were confirming something she had always known. The carriage back to Paris is hot now, mid-afternoon. the spring sun having decided by the time you board that it intends to make itself felt. You sit with your coat folded on your lap and watch Versailles diminish in the rear-facing window. The official isn't there this time. You're alone with a family who seems to be moving to Paris from somewhere further south. They have too much luggage for a simple visit, and the children are treating the carriage interior as personal property, which is the privilege of children on journeys, and a priest who reads the entire way with the particular concentrated blankness of a man using reading as a defence against involvement. You think about Madame de Montespon's eyes, the assessment in them, the completeness. You think about what it means to spend 15 years at the centre of the most powerful court in Europe, and then to be displaced, gently, with ceremony, with titles maintained and apartments retained, but displaced, and to continue living in the building where you were once the axis around which everything turned. You think about the composition Maître Arnaud spent 3 days on, warm instead of cold, something to carry, something that stays, something that, regardless of who the king prefers now, regardless of the arrangements of power and the movements of favour, something that says, I am here, I am present, I am warm, I have not gone away. Maître Arnaud is in the shop when you return. You give your account, the delivery, the apartment, the conversation. You describe it accurately, including what Madame said about the civet, including the phrase warm instead of cold. You have understood, over the last year, that accuracy is the thing he needs from you, not interpretation or protection, or the softened version of events. He listens without interrupting. When you finish, he nods. She's worn civet compositions for 20 years, he says. She knows what she wants. She knows when she has it. He picks up the order book, makes a notation. She'll want more. Yes, sir. Next time, you'll develop the composition. Not this one. She has this one. A variation. Something for the evenings, something lighter for summer. I'll review it. He closes the order book. You're ready. You stand very still. Am I? You say. He looks at you with the look that means, that was a foolish question, and you know it was a foolish question. But he answers it anyway, which is unusual, which tells you the answer matters to him as much as the question. You smelled the composition over 3 days, he says. You identified the components correctly. You described them to her accurately, including the civet and what it was doing, which is not obvious and which most people, most trained perfumers, not just apprentices, would have missed or gotten wrong. A pause. And you told her the truth rather than the pretty version. You told her the civet was there. Not everyone would have done that. I didn't want to lie to her. That's not why you told her. You told her because you knew she could smell the truth, and that lying to someone who can smell the truth is an offence worse than the lie itself. You think about this. Yes, you say. That's why. He nods again, once. Then you're ready. Summer arrives without ceremony in Paris, which is to say it arrives the way all seasons arrive in the city, through smell before anything else. One morning the air is spring cool and carrying the last trace of March damp, and the next morning it's something heavier and warmer, the river beginning its summer performance of olfactory extravagance, the market stalls loaded with stone fruit and early vegetables, the city itself seeming to sweat slightly as the temperature rises, and the closed-in streets and courtyards stop releasing the night's cold before the day's heat arrives. You work. You develop 4 compositions over June and July, 2 for new customers, 1 revision of a standard composition for a returning customer, 1 entirely new thing that begins as an experiment and becomes, After 12 iterations and a conversation with Maître Arnaud that goes on for 2 hours, something real, something you can put your name on if apprentices were allowed to put their names on things, which they aren't. You write everything down. The notebook is nearly full. You order another one from the paper seller on the Rue Saint-Jacques, a heavier one, better quality, the kind that will hold ink without bleeding. The paper seller asks what you use it for. Recipes, you say, which is true in a sense. In July, Grégoire sends word that a shipment has arrived. Not a routine shipment. Something specific, something Maître Arnaud ordered from a contact in Grégoire's network. Something that's been in transit for 6 months. The material is called odor. It comes from Southeast Asia, from trees of the genus Aquilaria that produce, in response to a specific fungal infection, a dark resinous wood that is weight for weight, more valuable than gold. Not metaphorically more valuable, literally. The best quality oud costs more than gold of equivalent weight and has for centuries, and will for centuries after this. The smell of oud is not simple. It's not like any single flower or animal or plant. It's more like a forest that has been burning for a long time and has learned to burn beautifully. Dark and resinous, and with a sweetness underneath that belongs to the wood itself, the healthy wood that was there before the infection, the ghost of the tree inside the medicine. Maître Arnaud holds the piece Grégoire has sent, a small piece, the size of your thumb, dark brown, almost black with the resin, and smells it for a long time, not the quick professional assessment, the other kind, the kind that means something personal. I haven't smelled this for 12 years, he says. Where did you smell it before? In Constantinople. I went once when I was younger than you. There was a market. He stops, sets the oud down on the bench. It doesn't matter. The point is that you remember smells better than you remember almost anything else, sharper, more immediate. He looks at you. That's why this work matters, not because we make things that smell nice, because we make things that people carry with them, that they will smell years from now and remember accurately, completely, with more detail than any painting can give them, a specific day, a specific room, a specific person. He sets the oud aside. The Comtesse de Sèvres, he says, picking up a flask, returning to the work. She told me once that a composition I made for her 30 years ago was the smell of her wedding, that she wore it that morning, that every time she smells benzoin now, she's there again, exactly there. He measures, his hand steady. That's what we're actually selling, not fragrance, memory, the ability to go back. Here's the thing about the wealthy of 17th-century France that I've been circling around and should just say directly, now that we've been in the workshop long enough to understand the materials. The wealthy smelled worse than the poor. This is documented. It is not legend or slander. There are accounts from contemporary sources, diaries, letters, medical texts, that describe the smell of the royal court, the smell of Versailles corridors, the smell of people whose social position required them to spend their days in close company with others who, like themselves, had not bathed. But here's the thing the paradox contains that makes it more interesting than just an irony. The wealthy smelled worse because they were trying harder. The poor washed because they had to. The laundress in cold water, the dyer in the vat, the cook whose hands were constantly wet. They were clean not because they were virtuous, but because their work required proximity to water. Their bodies were cleaned by the work. The wealthy, following medical advice, following fashion, following the genuine belief of their age that water was dangerous, the wealthy applied perfume, constantly, heavily, in the way that someone applies a solution to a problem. They changed their linen, they fumigated their rooms, they wore pomanders and carried flowers and commissioned compositions from people like Maître Arnaud that would do, for their bodies, what they believed water should kill them for doing themselves. And the perfume worked. Partially. It covered. It modified. It layered the warm animal smell of an unwashed body with something more complex and intentional. But the warm animal smell was still there, and it was growing. Because you can change your linen every day, but the skin under the linen hasn't been washed. The oils accumulate. The bacteria accumulate. The smell accumulates in the way things accumulate when you only manage the surface and not the source. The laundress goes home clean. The Marquise de Montespon goes to bed smelling of Maître Arnaud's work, which is extraordinary work, and underneath it, the body that produces what the work is trying to cover. The perfume is the civilization, the body is the animal, and the animal wins eventually regardless of how good the civilization is. This is the truth of the matter. This is what 9 months in a workshop on the Rue Saint-Honoré has taught you, with more precision and detail than anyone intended to teach. The smell of 17th-century French high society is the smell of very good perfume and the thing underneath it that the perfume can't quite reach. August. The city becomes, in August, a city determined to produce every smell it is capable of producing at maximum concentration. The heat rises from the stones. The river withdraws from its banks and concentrates. The market stalls sell fruit that's fully ripe, and sometimes slightly past it, the sweetness tipping toward fermentation. The wealthy leave, not all of them, but many of the Parisian houses of the nobility close for August, their owners at Versailles or their country estates or taking the waters at one of the spa towns that have become fashionable on the same logic that makes bathing dangerous. Mineral water, hot from the ground, is medicinal. Cold river water is death. Don't ask why, exactly. Just believe it. The city in August belongs to the people who don't leave. The working city. The actual city. You take a morning early in August, when the heat is building but hasn't yet reached the particular intensity of afternoon, and you walk further than you usually walk. Past the Rue Saint-Honoré, past the Palais Royal, past the crowded streets of the Marais, toward the river. The river in August is extraordinary in a way that requires the absence of any other priority. If you have somewhere to be, you walk past it. If you have an hour, you stop, you have an hour. You stand on the bridge, not the Pont Neuf exactly, but a smaller bridge just east of it, less trafficked, and you watch the Seine go by. The smell standing above the river in August is the smell of Paris in its most concentrated form. The river itself, which contains multitudes, plus the city's output into it, plus the heat that lifts both into the air directly into your face. But also, and this takes a moment to register, through and past the intensity of the first impression, also the smell of water. Just water. The basic mineral fact of a large volume of moving water in the morning light. The thing that the Marquis at Versailles would never let near his skin. The thing that the laundress spends 8 hours a day in. You lean on the bridge rail and watch the water and think about what Maître Arnaud said about smells and memory, about the Oud and Constantinople, and 12 years' distance that collapsed into nothing the moment the smell reached him. You think about what smell you'll carry from this year, from the workshop, from the deliveries, from the 2 trips to Versailles with packages that contained other people's private architecture, the jasmine in winter through the workshop door, the civet and rose of Metreano's composition building over 3 days on the bench, the deep corridors of Versailles smelling of the thing that power produces when it doesn't wash, and this, the Seine in August, standing still above moving water, the smell of the city and the smell of the water and the smell, underneath everything, of your own hands, always your own hands, stained faintly with the work, smelling of rose and benzoin, and the particular trace of iris root that lives now in the creases of your knuckles, as if it grew there. Autumn again. The year has made its circuit. You stand in the workshop on a morning in September that smells like the morning a year ago. Tallow and leather and river and the ghost of last night's work. And you understand that you're not the same person who stood in this workshop a year ago. Not dramatically different, not unrecognizable, but different in the way that things that have been worked on are different from how they started, changed by the work, shaped by the application of skill to them over time. Your hands know things. This is the clearest sign, and Maître Arnaud told you it was coming months ago in the way he tells you things that are coming, obliquely in passing, so that when they arrive you recognize them and understand that the recognition was prepared. Your hands know the weight of a flask correctly filled, the resistance of a stopper properly seated, the feel of good linen versus cheap linen, of real ambergris versus the grey stone Gregoire tried to pass off, of rose is absolute from Grasse versus the Turkish variety that's cheaper and slightly sharper. Your hands know when they're measuring, when the amount is right. Not from calculation, from feel, from the accumulated muscle memory of a year of this specific work, this specific scale, this specific sequence of gestures. Maître Arnaud notices. He doesn't say anything, but the distance between where he works and where you work has been increasing, slowly, over the months. The physical distance, the amount of space between your bench and his that says, this much of the work I will watch, and this much I trust you to do. The distance now is almost the width of the room, on a Thursday in October, a Thursday, the Comtesse de Sèvres' day, which has been fixed for 20 years and will not change. She comes in for her autumn selection. This time, Maître Arnaud is elsewhere, a guild meeting, one of the formal occasions that he cannot decline without consequences. He told you 2 days ago, with the specific quality of information he uses when he's testing whether you'll panic. You didn't panic. You know her preferences, he said. Yes, sir. You know the new compositions. Yes, sir. Don't recommend the oud-based one. It's not right for her. I know. Don't apologise for my absence. Explain that I'm at the guild, which is true, and that you've been authorised to assist her, which is also true. Yes, sir. So when the Comtesse de Sèvres arrives on Thursday morning, punctual as always in the dark green wool of autumn, with a particular quality of attention that is her signature, you are the one who greets her. She looks at you for a moment. Just a moment. Where is Arnaud? At the guild, madame. He apologises for the absence and has authorised me to assist you. A pause. The assessing quality is there. You've seen it before in this room, watching her smell through the autumn compositions last year while you stood at the secondary bench pretending to work. You're the Grasse boy, she says. Yes, madame. He mentioned you, more than once. She sets her gloves on the counter. Automatically, the the gesture of someone who's done this in this shop many times. Show me what's new. You show her 4 compositions. The first, a rose variation, heavier than the summer version, with sandalwood added to the base for autumn warmth. She smells it carefully, sets it aside, neither accepting nor rejecting. The second, something citrus-based that Maître Arnaud developed in July, unusual for autumn, intended to carry the smell of summer into the darker months. She smells it, sets it aside. The third, something you developed, the composition that began as an experiment and became, after 12 iterations, something real. You don't tell her that. You present it with the same information you've presented the others, the components, the character, the intended use, and you let her smell it. She smells it for longer than the others, sets it down, picks it up, smells it again. What's the fixative? Benzoin base, ambergris for lasting power. There's also a small amount of labdanum. It gives the warmth underneath. Not civet. Not in this one, no. The labdanum does similar work but lighter, more like warmth than heat. She looks at you. The look is different from the assessment look, more like the look the young woman had back in spring when she chose the green, sharp composition. Recognition. Who developed this? A half-second pause. Maître Arnaud reviewed it, you say. The development was mine. A longer pause. How old are you? 17, madame. 18 in November. She smells the composition once more, sets it down. I'll take it, she says. And the rose variation. Not the citrus. It's too soon for that. Arnaud knows I don't wear citrus in winter. Yes, madam. Tell him. She picks up her gloves from the counter. Tell him the new boy's composition is better than his summer rose. He'll know what that means. She leaves. You stand in the empty shop for a long moment. Then you pick up the composition she chose, your composition, sealed in its flask, waiting to be wrapped, and you hold it carefully the way you hold things you've made, with the particular combination of pride and terror that comes from making something that goes out into the world without you. That evening, Maître Arnaud comes back from the guild. You give him the account, precisely, what you showed her, what she chose, what she said, including the last part. He listens without expression. When you finish, there's a silence. Then he makes the short sound that isn't quite a laugh. You've heard it before. He made it when you told him about going to Versailles by yourself to gawk at the Marquis's apartments. He made it when you described Madame de Montespon's phrase warm instead of cold. The sound of something being confirmed. She's right, he says. The summer rose was always too sweet. He puts on his apron, returns to the bench. We'll talk about your license application in the spring, he says. 2 more years of the apprenticeship, but there are provisions for early qualification when the candidate has demonstrated sufficient. He measures something, the gesture so practiced it doesn't interrupt the sentence. Sufficient judgment. You don't move. Thank you, you say. Don't thank me. Thank the Comtesse. She has opinions and isn't afraid of them. He looks up from the bench briefly. Useful quality, rarer than you'd think. November comes, then December. The workshop is warm from the fire Maître Arnaud keeps burning from October through April. Not generously warm, not the warmth of excess, but the specific warmth of a room in which temperature matters, because the materials care about temperature and the work requires hands that can feel. You work at your bench, and Maître Arnaud works at his. The distance between them, the width of the room, and still growing. Outside, Paris does what Paris does in winter. Folds inward. The market stalls reduce. The grand houses close their shutters against the cold, the silk-draped interiors and their perfumed occupants settling in for the months when going out is optional, and warmth is the only luxury that genuinely matters. From the street, on the coldest days, you can see the breath of the horses, the steam from the doorways of the bakers and the taverns, Paris breathing. Inside, you work. A new composition for a new customer, a merchant's wife on the Rue des Fosses Saint-Germain, who wants something her mother used to wear, which she describes with the particular effort of someone trying to articulate a smell they remember but can't name. You listen carefully, you ask the questions. Was it sweet or sharp? Did it feel warm or cool on the skin? Did it remind you more of outdoors or indoors? Flowers or wood, she answers. The answers are imprecise in the way that memory is imprecise. She says sweet but means warm. She says flowers but means the specific smell of a room where flowers have been for a long time. You understand. You build the composition over 4 days, going back to her twice with samples, adjusting. The 4th sample makes her cry, not in distress, in the other kind, the kind that has nowhere else to go. She puts her hands over her face and cries for 30 seconds, and then looks up at you with the expression of someone who has been given back something they thought was gone. That's it, she says. That's exactly it. You're beginning to understand what Maître Arnaud meant about memory, not abstractly, concretely, with the specificity of craft. A smell is a retrieval system. It goes directly to the part of the brain that stores experience rather than fact, the part that remembers what things felt like rather than what they were. When you make a composition that reaches that part of a person, when the smell unlocks the room rather than describing the room, you've done the actual work. Everything else is technique. The technique matters. The technique is what allows you to do the actual work reliably rather than by accident. The benzoin and labdanum and rose and iris root and the careful measured application of civet, all of it technique. All of it in service of the moment when someone puts the composition to their wrist and goes somewhere, goes back to their mother's house, or their wedding morning, or the garden of their childhood, or the room where someone they loved used to sit, goes there completely, for a moment, before the conscious mind reasserts itself and explains that this is just smell, this is just chemistry, this is just molecules binding to receptors. Before all of that, for that moment they're there. That's what perfume is. That's what the trade is. A year and a half after you arrived in Paris from Grasse, the notebook is full. The second notebook is half full. Your hands are permanently stained in the creases of the knuckles with iris root. You wake before the bells of Saint-Roch without effort now. Your body has made the decision independently. It doesn't require the bells, just confirms them. The garret room is yours alone. The previous occupant, a journeyman who left for a position in Lyon, took his things in October, and Maître Arnaud hasn't replaced him, which means either he doesn't need another apprentice right now or he's keeping the room empty deliberately, giving you space, giving you the privacy that he told you on your first morning was a luxury nobody at your level could afford. You can afford it now, just slightly, just enough. You think about this sometimes in the few minutes between waking and rising. The distance from nobody at your level to enough. It's not a large distance. You're still an apprentice. You still earn almost nothing in the formal sense. Your compensation, the room and the food and the training itself. You still eat the meals that appear from Maître Arnaud's kitchen with the practical gratitude of someone who knows what hunger feels like on the road from Grasse. but you have, slowly and without announcement, moved into the category of person who has something. You have skill, demonstrable, tested, increasingly confirmed by the opinions of people whose opinions are calibrated by 20 years of knowing what things should be. You have knowledge, not all of it. You're nowhere near all of it, but enough to work, enough to develop, enough to begin. You have a composition in a flask on your workbench that the Comtesse de Sèvres is wearing right now, somewhere in her house near the Tuileries, in the company of people who have no idea it exists or where it came from, or how old the person who made it is. And here's what I want to leave you with. We've been talking about the smell of the 17th century, about Versailles and its corridors and the paradox of the dirty wealthy and the clean poor, about the miasma theory and the linen and the perfumers who built an industry on the gap between what the body is and what people wanted to be. But underneath all of it, underneath the history, the science, the social architecture of an absolute monarchy managing its court's hygiene crisis through the purchase of fixatives, underneath all of it is the simpler thing. People want to smell good to each other. This is so old it predates history, so universal it operates in every culture that's ever left a record, so human that it might be part of the definition of human. We care about the impression we make. We care whether the person next to us is comfortable. We care enough about this to develop, in every civilization, some version of the practice of modification, of saying, the body is what it is, and here is what we choose to add to it. The 17th century French court added rose absolute and ambergris and civet. They added it wrong, in the sense that they were treating a symptom rather than a source, and they added it with the elaborate confidence of people who have convinced themselves that not treating the source is medically sound. But the impulse underneath the elaborate mistake, the desire to be presentable, to smell like something other than the unavoidable animal, that impulse is genuine. That impulse is you this morning, and the merchant's wife crying over the composition that smelled like her mother, and the Comtesse de Sèvres recognizing something true. We want to smell like ourselves, but better. We want to carry something that says, I was here, I was warm, I did not go away. That's what Maître Arnaud spent 3 days on, for Madame de Montespon at her window. Not perfume exactly, not decoration, a reminder, a statement made in benzoin and rose and the carefully measured warmth of civet. I am still here. The king's doctors were wrong about water. The nobility were wrong to believe them. The poor were right, by accident, not by choice. But everyone, the laundress in cold water and the marquise at her window, and the merchant's wife in the small shop on the Rue, Saint-Honoré and the Comtesse in her dark green wool, everyone wanted the same thing, to be remembered as warm. Let the workshop close now. Let the shutters go up on the Rue Saint-Honoré, and the day's accounts go into the ledger, and the flasks be sealed against the night air. Let the compositions rest in their darkness, the benzoin and the labdanum and the rose absolute and the oud from Southeast Asia, and the ambergris that floated for a year in an ocean to get here. Let the smell of jasmine that lives in the workshop walls come forward, the way it does every evening when the competing smells of work have settled and the underlying smell of the room. Years of jasmine, years of rose, years of every good thing this room has processed, rises to meet the quiet. Let Paris go about its night. The gin shops and the taverns and the watermen and the link boys moving through the dark. The servants' corridors of Versailles emptying as the court retires. the hall smelling of candle smoke and the residue of a day of 17,000 people living at close quarters. The fountains going still. The king has retired. The fountains stop. The water drops back to its normal level somewhere in the pipes. The laundresses home. The comtesse in her house. Madame de Montespon in her apartment, in the light that's left over from the day, wearing what she was given, smelling of Maître Arnaud's work and the warm truth underneath it. All of them, all of us, the animal underneath, indifferent and persistent, the civilization on top, trying, always trying. The candle on your bench is burned down now. Your hands are still. The last entry in the notebook, the one you made this evening, the composition for the merchant's wife, the fourth iteration, the one that made her cry. The ink is dry. Tomorrow Maître Arnaud will be at the bench before you get there. Tomorrow there will be a delivery and a new customer inquiry and probably a letter from Versailles, because the letters from Versailles have started coming regularly now, which is its own kind of measurement of where things stand. Tomorrow there will be jasmine. There is always jasmine, but that's tomorrow. Right now there's the warm workshop smelling of years of good work. There's the cold garret above it, and the straw mattress that is yours alone. There's the notebook with its record of a year and more of learning what the work is, not the surface of it, not the romance of rare materials and noble customers, but the actual thing underneath. The trade of memory, the trade of warmth, the trade of giving people something to carry. You've earned the sleep. Let it come. Let the smell of benzoin and labdanum and the good rose from grass follow you down. Let the body, the animal, the unimpressed, the constant, let it rest. The Comtesse de Sèvres is wearing your composition tonight. The merchant's wife has her mother back for the length of a breath whenever she wants her. Madame de Montespon is warm at her window. That's enough. That's more than enough. The candle gutters. The darkness is full of everything you've learned. Let it be soft. Let the Seine keep running. Let the jasmine keep its memory. Let sleep take you the way the day always eventually gives way to the night. Not because the day loses, but because rest is part of it too. Part of the composition. The note underneath everything that allows the other notes to be heard. You're warm enough. You're safe enough. You've done the work. Good night.